Welcome to Expedition Self on OMTimes Radio with lifelong learner, entrepreneur, and creator of the worlds of Expedition Self, Sam Parrotto. Sam shares 4 decades of studying, guiding, and teaching how to go inside so we can build an incredibly powerful, dynamic, and validating relationship with the self. Expedition Self is laced with stellar, unexpected insights about what it means to be human. Listen now and ignite your self-development process with Sam Parrotto.
Well, hello. Welcome to Expedition Self. On today's show, we're going to talk about handbooks for life, for ways of being, and whether or not we actually think they would help, and what you might want to put into them, and how experiential would they really need to be to actually make a difference. And, the idea for today's show came about because I'm preparing to work to land a TED Talk. And, that there's this process of trying to figure out what is it that you really want to say, that you're passionate about. And you play with titles for what you're going to talk about. So this idea of a being handbook was one of the ideas. But and I thought, oh, that'll be a good radio show topics. But beyond that, over the years, particularly when something was very challenging, or it seemed like if you had just known something before, you kind of made a different choice, I'd hear people say, well, it's not like anyone gives us a handbook or anything. And I feel like that's this great equalizer for the brain, so that we can kind of justify, oh, I really didn't know it. I really didn't, I didn't get it. And that lets me off the hook for not knowing it. But it is a kind of hard to talk about subject, because I think most of us wish we didn't have to live life to actually understand it. Right? Imagine if you understood enough that you really could like breeze through it, and you could make all these choices that have you land at the exact right spot in time and place, and connect in exactly the ways you were supposed to, and end up in the workshops, or end up in the jobs, or end up in the relationships that were exactly the ones that you thought you came here and you would want to participate in. I guess you could say, well, where would the mystery and the fun be in that? But the truth is that life is painful, and it's confusing and disruptive and upending. It took me a minute to figure out that word. And it would be so much easier if we could at least know what the lesson is before we make decisions and take action. I mean, at least know why I'm making the mess I'm making. I think I have been driven by this for a long time, is that if I could just understand why I'm going through it, it would make it tolerable. And, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Enneagram, but it was one of these wonderful systems that helped me start to recognize that every one of us have a different way that we need to relate to life. And mine is that the more I can understand, the more I can tolerate the intensity, right? The emotion. So this is what I want to talk about today, the idea of this handbook, and why we dream about having one, and what you or I might include in it. But before we dive into that subject, I always like to start a little bit on other things. And I spent earlier this day taking my son to the ER. He had what's called a polyonital cyst, and it had to be lanced. And, I don't know if all of you can relate, but watching your child, no matter what age they are, suffer and hold up in pain, it takes a toll. So I would say I'm emotionally this afternoon just a little bit on the oh boy, I'm feeling a lot side, right? So anyway, I want to remind you that this is a call-in show, and the number is 202-570-7057. And remember, when you call in, Chris, the producer, he'll greet you with a wonderful hello, and then let me know that you're waiting. So today in particular, which is if you're looking for an idea, you can call in with your thoughts on what you would put in your handbook and how you think it would have helped you in your life or not. On a personal note, I've been in this process of getting unstuck. And think about that tarot card, the one that's got all the sticks and they're actually in the mud. It's probably worthy of a whole show, but it's so present for me right now. I just thought I would talk a little about it. And when I think about being stuck in things, there's always some emotional attachment to it that I have to unpack and tease out. And it's not even that I really know what it is that has to be unpacked and teased out. I just know that if I'm stuck, that that's true. So one of the places I'm stuck right now is with all of my stuff. I had a vacation home years ago that when I got unmarried, I brought all the stuff back from there. I have clothes that I have got 4 different sizes of. And I hold on to things thinking, oh, I'll want that someday. And I collect things and I don't want to throw away anything that I think I might need, some gift wrapping stuff or some art stuff. And now I'm really needing to use my time to do more creative things or to spend kind of moving in this new direction. And I'm bogged down by the weight of having to get all this stuff done. And discipline would be another really interesting show. And I haven't had enough of that to get really all the way through it. So I was in this conversation with a friend and she said, you know, you're at that point that you either need to like do something with it intentionally or just literally walk it out to the trash. And I've been sitting with this image lately. Of course, I picture myself taking things to the trash and it's like, no, I'm not doing it. But this idea of do something with it or walk it to the trash. And I think growth work is a lot like this. Life stuff, it swims around in the background of our mind. And it starts to be part of the decorating, like the wall art, right? Or the shelf in the corner, or the color of the woodwork. It just becomes so normalized, like it's just there. And of course, when we're working to accept ourselves, it's kind of like, well, whatever's there is fine. And I think we ultimately recognize it as some visual white noise, right? Or a virtual white noise kind of thing. So when we decide to change something or we realize that we want something like I want right now, part of then all of a sudden it has these nondescript, once important, now part of the unseen stamps of life stuff. It fills a different role and we have a chance to perceive it differently. I guess, we could say that once we want something new, right, it shifts our idea of how essential it actually is, has us relate to it different. So what doesn't work about this, deal with it, or trash it is, though, when you think about growth work, is that the psyche, it really needs to be honored for all that it holds on to until we really get in touch with the reasons we're holding on to it, because there's some opportunity or healing there. But this dance that exists between wanting something new or different in our lives and what is actually mired in the mud and the normalcy and the status quo, it helps to illuminate the things that are actually standing in our way. It kind of like peels the layer of the veil, the things that need attention and learning and care. And that's kind of what I'm paying a lot of attention to right now. And so I finished a project last weekend, a clear out project, one. And so I'm going to count that as a win. And I also think this whole idea of this dance that I'm talking about between the wanting something new and the what's normal and we just accept as it is what it is that it has a lot to do with timing and being at the right place at the right time, which is another concept I'm looking at, is how to be in pace with life rather than lagging behind it or trying to outrun it. And that's an interesting subject too, in and of itself. So I'm wanting to get freed up, and the cleaning out of the stuff of my life is taking up too much of my energy and underground attention. And so I will keep you posted. So, okay, write the number down to call in today. It's 202-570-7057. I think this is a perfect day to share your thoughts. Perfect day. Good subject. I feel like it's one everybody thinks about. Everybody has had something about what you would put in your own personal handbook. First off, I want to say that if I were really going to deliver this handbook of life, it would have to be delivered in stages, right? In my opinion, and the idea of the handbook would not be so someone bypasses real life experiences, but so that the person would be more prepared to handle them. So that's the first question you have to ask yourself is, why would I want a handbook? What would the purpose of it actually be? And it's worth thinking about because I wouldn't want to take all the mystery out of life, right? Like I wouldn't want to take all the surprises, all the unexpected random meetings or, what I want, synchronistic happenings. And I picture that, though, that each year of life, there's a basic progression of core concepts that I think would help somebody be more prepared for what life is, that can be brought to the human being, and that they can lay the groundwork for someone to handle what's coming next. And of course, you will notice in my focus, it's all about how do we get prepared to handle what life is, right? So that we can meet it and greet it and show up full of our own power. And when, again, meeting and greeting it full of our own power doesn't mean we surf right over the top of that wave. It just means that we can handle it. And certainly this comes out of my life where there were a number of times that I think I wasn't sure I could handle it. And a lot of the conversations that people who love me or who have tried to support me have are always reminding me that I can handle it. So if you have a different perspective, though, on why you would want this handbook, your focus wouldn't be on laying groundwork so someone can handle it. Your focus might be on providing life hacks that help you to accelerate faster in life or get through accomplishments faster, right? But I'm going to go on my track today, and hopefully you'll call in and give me yours. So think about it. We have developmental tools given to babies and these special toys that you give them to help them integrate their left and right brain and get the stimulation that they need. So why wouldn't we do the same for human being skills? And then advance these skills through the remainder of life. Now, I think lots of people would say, oh, we are doing human being skills. There's social interaction that goes on when children play with other children, and there's the relationship between the parents and the bonding that happens. But I think that there's a whole nother layer of intentional skills that we could actually provide. And so I see some fundamental human being skills that I'd start from the very beginning. And these are the ones I'd like to share with you. So the first one that comes to mind for me is this idea of not shutting down sensory material. Sensory material, that's touch, right? That's the smell, that's sight, that's listening, that's the ability to have skin make contact with the substances of life. And really, what happens is life is loud and it is bright. And people in it are emotionally volatile and they can be aggressive. And so the making contact with life in a sensory way, right, is wrought. It's wrought with danger because the sensory in the body and being able to stay in the body to receive touch is very much tied to being able to handle life. But there's a lot that we do when we're growing up or that happens around us that causes us to start managing the incoming stimulus. The too loud TV, the way we're handled and passed around and lifted up, the nature of someone's touch, right? Dare say our receptors are, I think, overstimulated a lot from birth. Or there's a carelessness in throwing us into situations and not actually registering what's really going on. And of course, at the moment, I have a vision of a baby, but I actually think this goes on throughout our whole life. So in the handbook, I would include guidelines for how to retain and gain a capacity to handle this sensory material. That I'd teach people how to touch with a listening that allows them to register what's actually going on for that person or that child who is having a sensory experience. Because the minute we get disconnected from our body, or we're not invited to come into relationship with that body, is the minute we shut down a whole fundamental reservoir of self-information that we need if we're going to handle life. And, I'd get them to start thinking about the world through the sensory lens, richly taking in everything that is happening around them through the senses versus just the mind. And I'd create some set of like virtual flashcards that show a child's response when something is too big and too much. I think that's half of what gets in the way of our learning, is that we don't know what it looks like to look different than it looks, right? We don't know what it looks like to look different than it looks. So we have nothing to compare to, or we don't have anything to contrast it to. Okay, it's break time. When we come back, we'll pick up what would we put in this handbook of life.
A conscious lifestyle for a mindful life. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM.
OMTimes magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organisation, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Connect at omtimes.com. OMTimes, creating a more conscious lifestyle.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
You came across someone struggling with hunger. How would you recognize them? Would you notice an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for summer break
because she may not be having lunch again until September?
Or a war veteran who's having a hard time landing a job
and getting back on his feet?
I am the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger. I am hunger in America.
Hunger can be hard to recognize. Learn why at IamHungerInAmerica.org, brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
All right, well, you are back. You are listening to Expedition Self. I'm Sam Parrotto, and we are talking about what would a How to Do Life handbook or a Way to Be handbook look like today. I think before we went to break, I was talking about that one of the first and most important things I'd put in the handbook is this retaining and building a sensory connection within the self. And I do want to actually just take this moment, I'll probably mention it later in the show too, but that emotionally, if we can't handle feeling and emotion in a sensory way, we will separate from the body. And so you can imagine when I talk about the world being too big and too much, that produces an emotional experience. So the emotion and the sensory material, they're really interwoven. You can't work with one really without the other. And this sensory material is an issue all the way through adulthood. You know, it's not just, get a 5-year-old ready. Because in truth, adulthood gets harder and harder. You're handling more, you have more responsibility on your shoulders, and you have to feel it more fully because you've got more of those connections between the brain and all the rest. So with each year, we could include in this handbook new ways to recognize an overstimulated nervous system. You know, those 660 or 666,000 nerve endings being zapped and tweaked too often. You know, what do we look like when we can't handle that sensory material? Well, we get sick. We become unresponsive. We begin to feel depressed, maybe. We don't want to engage socially. We're not able to think as clearly. We start to become angry, right? I mean, these are just some examples. I certainly am not providing a whole list here, but I'm hoping you're thinking of some yourself, right? Is what actually happens when we lose that connection and now we're trying to handle life over the top of it. I just can't speak enough about the need to have sensory material become part of this handbook of life. We need to have a deep recognition, and this is kind of a build on here, that behavior is often showing us what's going on under the surface at that sensory level. And then it's not to be seen as good or bad behavior, because what it really is it's this dashboard or a mirror, right? Or a billboard sign, you know, of our system at work communicating with us inside the world that something is happening inside of us, and that the sensory network is experiencing an outage or an overflow or a depletion, right? Or a misdirection, right? A distortion, like goes to the right instead of the left. So as we get older, let's say we're in our 30s now, we would add information about how to recognize these more subtle sensory messages. And we would look, right? This would be some of the new stuff we would add as we go. We'd look for ways to tie the events of the physical world, of the everyday happenings, with what's going on inside. Now, I don't think everybody does that. I think we write things off to the physical world. Oh, I just was very busy, or I didn't get enough sleep, right? But we don't actually say, wait a minute, if it's going on out there, it's going on in here. You know, if something's happening, like when I try to go out into the world and make things happen, there it is again, right? Then I'm going to go look at what's going on inside of me and that sensory world and see what's really stirring up. Not feeling motivated at the job, losing interest in your partner, being short-tempered with your best friend, getting sick of spending time with your child. All of these real-life experiences would be somehow interwoven with the relationship with your sensory self. And with this, now we're older and we're adding to our understanding of sensory information. We'd know how to employ sound and light and emotional processing or intensity and beauty, and what we would do with life pressure and scent and nature and drumming and creative visualization and meditation and all of those things to help bring about balance and the support for life's changes. Because by staying connected and building year after year after year on our understanding of this sensory connection, we actually now understand how to use sensory material from the world we live in. And we understand how to adjust it, and we understand how to facilitate our own reconnection. So you see, there's this knowledge that comes with this that we can be attached to. I know I'm going on and on about this, but I just feel like it's so foundational to the handbook, right? It's so foundational to the handbook. So one of the big messages of this handbook, the overarching, right, besides being able to handle life and do it in a way that we stay connected at a sensory level to our bodies and to what's happening in our bodies, is being whole. Being whole causes us to get through life better. And so in my handbook, we would teach a ton about what being whole actually means. And it's a tall order. There's a lot, there's a number of subtleties, there's a lot of facets to it. It is very much like one of those kaleidoscopes that when you turn it, all of a sudden the picture changes. But some of the basics to me are, it means not being good or bad, that you remove the moral judgments, right, off of the self so that you can actually claim in a healthy and embracing way everything that's going on inside, right? Another is that it includes the entire range of emotions, from hate to love, from resentment to delight, right? The whole range. And again, even if inside of our life experience we have trouble feeling any of those, or recognizing or identifying any of them, it still includes it. So we start with the supposition and the platform that embraces all. And when we start like that, then it gives us permission. It gives us a lot of permission to connect and explore, right, over our lifetimes. I got a little caught up in that. I think that's a really important part of this, right? So it takes the case, this wholeness thing, that there is not just the conscious mind or the intellect, but there's also the unconscious and the subconscious, and the imagination and the dream state, right? And hidden kind of messages are valid destinations for us, to have revelation, to reveal information about the self to the self. And this wholeness would recognize that the most important relationship to cultivate in life is first with the self and then with the others. And, just as a small example, what happens is, as our children are growing up, and I realize I'm focused on the children piece, but this happens in every client I have too. There's this recognition of, what was that person's behavior and was it acceptable to me? Instead of, hey, what's going on with you that's your behavior? Can you put words on it? And how is that connecting to what you're thinking and what you're feeling and what happened yesterday and where you are in the world and in life? We're very focused on whether it meets some external expectation rather than turning it back in on the person to actually get in connection with themselves so they can find words for it, so they can be self-reflective. So this would mean that pleasing would be downplayed. And because people who before are strong enough to handle the independent choosing that comes with this, it would be processed through self-individuation. Well, that's a big word. Self-individuation rather than making parents proud. Now, I'm not sure I said that so well. This idea of, I'm going to have behavior and then it pleases you and then you give me feedback for it. And I never really go inside to figure out what I would say or want or describe as the reason for me doing it, which again might not stack up to what we want from our good, from a good behavior standpoint. What I'm saying is that when you would be raised in this kind of handbook experience, that everyone would be stronger to handle someone's self-individuating statement. I don't want to do that. That isn't something that's comfortable for me. I'm not ready yet. Right? Instead of seeing that as opposition or resistance or something that is a problem. You see, in my handbook, being whole would be the end game. And success would be defined by each and every step of life, like the living it, the doing it, whether it looks successful or not, as necessary for wholeness. You're talking about TED Talks. All you have to do is watch some of the TED Talks and people talk about their lives. And, there is a woman that I just watched, and I cannot remember her name for the life of me, but her TED Talk is about being a misfit. And when you hear the story of her life and where she's come and where she's gotten and the kind of journey she's had and what she's been able to land inside of, it is jaw-dropping. And she really epitomizes this experience of whether it looks successful or not every step of life is necessary for wholeness. And I will put it on my, I'll put a link on my website, samparrotto.com, and you can find it there. But you can also search under Misfit. Anyway, it's an amazing story. And it really, really exemplifies what I'm really trying to say here. So even deep feelings, sadness, disappointment, loss, resentment, hate, all of it would be seen as a chapter of learning for the person. And a chapter on disappointment. It would range through an entire lifetime with a person returning to see what's new with each new experience and reconnect it and rethink about it and relook at it. And that offers up anything, right? That we're studying. We're studying for ourselves our own life themes, because in order for wholeness to be a pillar in the handbook, then it means we'd have to make room. We'd have to make room for people to experiment with what wholeness is. And it's not just our wholeness we're experimenting with, it's everyone's. So there would be some communication and relationship skills that would be built into it to make that room so that we're not just unconsciously bumping into each other all the time, which is what I think we actually do a lot now. So this brings me to another key aspect of the handbook. I would have an entire section on experimentation and how to set boundaries so that experimentation is safe, ways to engage in learning projects, ways to create safe spaces for people to make mistakes and fail. And of course, this would mean that we'd all learn how to make that room for each other, which is what I just spoke about. So in teen years, there'd be lots of practice with not taking others' judgments and criticisms to heart, because you'd see it all as practice. Now, I think peer pressure and teenage times and the experience of trying to come into that phase of life is a very overbearing, all-consuming kind of thing. But imagine if what ran alongside it was a recognition of, I'm in an experiment. You know, this is not life or death. I am here to see what I can learn, and to be able to hold that space alongside all of that social group stuff, you know, that we encounter at that time. Okay, again, to me, what starts at age 1 continues with a new handbook and more advanced ways to work with key concepts, right? Each year, wholeness, sensory awareness, experimentation. Just imagine if children from a very young age could grow into adults who would know how to, now hear me out, stop believing what people say, because most of the time they're simply processing their own material, right? And they're in a phase of that process, and a lot of times what they direct at other people, they're going to rethink later anyway. Imagine if you could provide this for yourself right now. Imagine what would open up in your life, right? Okay, see, I'm kind of liking this handbook idea as I go through this. We don't know how to listen to each other. Not really. So a handbook would definitely spend a ton of time helping us learn how to listen and actually hear what someone's saying. The words that most of the time they don't nail it, right? They don't put the pin right on the point. They're not really depicting what's going on fully for someone. They don't maybe have context to describe why someone's saying what they're saying. So, of course, this is a whole communication practice, and it would get attention for a whole lifetime. You know, we'd learn how to communicate with I statements, connecting thoughts with feelings. We'd de-emphasize that intellectual debate and play up relating. And we teach a lot, right? It took me, I don't think I really even got this next piece until I was in my late 30s as a beginning, is about what self-protection and defense and denial and deflection are, so that all communication would have these basics as a way to understand and grow deeper. But the most important thing we'd want to teach in the communication section is that being right isn't the point. And there's always a deeper truth. And when you start teaching that from a really young age, and it's in a handbook somewhere, and we keep de-emphasizing it, it's not that you're going to make it wrong for trying to be right. It's you're going to add to it to say, what else is there? You're going to go back into the self. What else is happening, right? Because the most important thing is that relationship with the self. I mean, that's what we've said. So every time somebody is participating and experimenting with something that's in the handbook, it's all fodder for that, look what I just did. Oh, I wonder why I thought that. Oh, that's really fascinating. Let me look closer. So I just also want to say that if anybody has called in during this window, Chris had to step away from the mic for a little bit of time. And so if you're over there waiting to have an answer, I will let you know when he is able to kind of let you back in here. So, all right. And, now that I have said that, I'm not sure whether we're doing break time here. Let me just double check because I think we're coming up on break also. I just got a note. He is back. So, okay, that's awesome. So let me just review before we go to break so that you can really ponder this. And this is a good time to call in. I want to know what would be in your handbook. Like, you don't just have to listen to me about this, right? So, but in my handbook, it would provide more and more advanced insight and exercises with each passing year that are focused on shoring up the sensory network, being whole as the focus of success. The relationship with the self would be the very most important in relationship in life, and pleasing others would be seen as secondary. Experimentation and practice would be related to as the source of growing. Listening skills that make it safer for ourselves and others to experiment and practice, and communication skills that cause us to stop believing and taking to the bank people's words and judging and assessing, and instead looking for what's really going on for them. That's it. That's what I think. That's what I think should be in the handbook. So when we come back, there's a rub.
The best of holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. ascendinghearts.com.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
If I could be you,
and you could be me,
for just 1 hour.
If you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
All right, well, we are back, and I'm Sam Parrotto. You're listening to Expedition Self, and we are talking about what would life look like if we could create a handbook, and I'm sharing a lot about what I would put in the handbook and how I would want to deal with it. And we have a caller. Pauline, what do you think about this handbook thing?
Yeah, I haven't. I didn't even give it much thought because I didn't even know what she was talking about. I always come in late to the show, and then I get sidetracked, so I don't really know what the topic is. But I'm thinking about it, so you don't have to put me first, so I can think about it for a little bit.
Okay, well, you know what? That is completely fine. Thank you for calling in, and I love it. That's right. The whole
I'm sorry.
point of the show.
I thought I was talking to Chris. I had one idea, but like you already said it about really having the people really go in. You know how they used to have in school religious instruction, and some people didn't have, religious instruction to go to. That could have been time to connect to ourselves instead of, right. I don't even know if they will allow meditation in school without it calling it meditation, without it being any secular, non-secular kind of a thing.
I think some schools are doing some of that, but I am completely with you. When my son went to high school, some way or another, I thought that was what was going to happen, is he'd have this morning connection time where he would get to just talk about what's going on with him. It didn't turn out that they did it that way, but I'm with you completely.
They have like some of these schools like Rudolph Stein. I've never been to those schools. Well, Montessori, they teach more skills that have to do with life. Skills, I like that idea, as well as it's really a Rudolph Steiner. They teach them to nature and things like that. I mean, that more practical things that they can actually use in life.
And the things I'm talking about, I don't know that anyone would consider them quite practical because they're more like being skills. Right. They're more like, how do we relate to ourselves, or how do we relate to what's actually happening?
And not judge. It's so hard. It's maybe teaching them not to judge anybody. That would be really.
That starts with not judging themselves, right?
Right. That's the whole thing. Is they can just be, but if nobody else would interfere in there and judging the kids, and the teachers have to judge them based on their whatever scores or whatever not. So they're already at a disadvantage at school. I have a feeling it's going to have to be homeschool. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for calling. Pauline? Did she already hang up? Well, Pauline, if you're really still listening, thank you so much for calling and sharing your thoughts. I'm with you about that. It would be awesome if this idea of developing a relationship with the self was more important than all that judgment. So it looks like we've got another caller. Diane, have you wanting to talk about this handbook thing?
Well, yes. It took me a while to actually wrap my head around what would really go into my handbook. And how would I phrase it? And as you were on break, I came up with what I feel has been so important for me to learn in my life, and I think that I would want somebody to read it and maybe get a jump on their life and not struggle like I have. And that would be to read as much as you could read, whether it is an adult book or it's a magazine off the shelf, and whether or not you can pronounce or you understand the word, because at the end of the story or the end of the article, you still know what it was about, whether you could pronounce the name or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that comes out of your life because why? Because that's what I've been sharing is like a lot of the things on mine were things that were pain or it was hard for me or something.
I think it's because I stopped reading when I couldn't pronounce the person's last name or the dog that went into the woods and they named him a name that I couldn't pronounce the word. And so I put the book down and didn't finish it. And when I was in school, I got to the point where I would just read the inside of the cover. You know how books have paper covers on them and they give you kind of a summary of what's in the book? And I would make my book reports on that because I found when I read the book, because I couldn't pronounce it, I didn't think I knew what was going on, and I would put the book down.
Wow. Well, it's awesome advice. I do think that any way that we are able to get access, right, to what's happening in the world, and take in more information, it allows us to expand our own internal world as well.
So that would be the first thing. That probably would be my chapter, and I probably could write it like I would probably have more than 5 or 10 paragraphs for sure, because I think that I think that stymied my life for going forward, because I felt like I was not as smart as I should have been in order to pronounce the word so I would know what it was.
Right, or could have been.
Or could have been, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it very much. It's a great addition to the conversation.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Wow. So I hope those of you who are listening, I think it's a worthwhile exercise to say, what is it that would matter to you? What is it that would be important to you? Because both Pauline and Diane pointed to something that is important out of their life. And of course, when you get clear about that, that also becomes the thing you embody and you take on for yourself. And, there's this, I think I've talked about this before in astrology, the wounded healer is Chiron, is like wherever we suffered or wherever we, like in my case, I just didn't understand at all what was happening. That's the thing that moves us along in life to try to grow. And that's the place where we stay focused. So before we went to break, I said there's a rub. There's a rub to all of this. And so this is it. We are actually all wired so very differently. We come into life with a different focus, a unique one, very specific to us, a way of seeing things, a way of feeling and experiencing them. So even if we put all the right, I'm going to call right like my information, the right information in the handbook, it would still land differently for each person. The data I would work with in the same experience would be different data that another person would take away from it. And no two persons' lifestyles, their growing up, their aptitudes, their schooling, their families, they're just not the same. And dare I say that some people just start out with a deeper understanding of life or a better understanding of how to get into other people's worlds or more connection to their sensory body or less comfort with emotions. Like some babies like to be held. Some don't. Some adults know that they're feeling. And some adults just think their feelings, right? They think about them. Like people are so different and life dishes out entirely unique, unrelated experiences to work with. So how would this handbook thing work if it's being applied to all this unique, all these different people walking with different thoughts and different connections and different processing? Well, I believe that we have this divine imperative, a sort of hypothesis that runs our life. And so any teaching or experience or advice that goes against this hypothesis is less likely to stick. We just don't pay the same attention to it. And if it's really there, we might even work to prove it wrong, right? Or prove that thing that's coming against our hypothesis wrong. I have something I'm trying to prove in life. It's that anyone can grow enough. Anyone can grow enough to experience like full love and abundance and accelerate their evolution. Every moment, and I mean every single moment in my life, is tied to learning about it, testing it, proving it, questioning it. I'm experimenting with this in some way all the time. Now, where it's taken me is something I don't think I would have expected. Like I've had a ton of moments that demonstrated really extreme power dynamics, where one person had a lot of power and it felt like the other person didn't, and how I had to work through this. And it's led me to see relationships through the window of needs and of manipulation and of dominance and surrender and of ownership and self-responsibility. And I've also, along the way, it's led me to a bunch of time to explore self-expression in all its forms and what becomes possible the more you can express. And big questions like, well, where should limits exist? Are there limits? And, you can see where some of that power stuff would interweave with the self-expression. As I watch somebody who's very out there using a ton of space in the room, and then that's often me, and then notice what happens to those who get smaller in the face of that. So my point here is that this divine imperative that is yours, that you are working on, it will always shape whatever is being taught or whatever experience you're having to suit your learning path. Your thinking that is the casing around the window that is you. It's going to have you receive life through that understanding, that perspective, that search. And all of the experiences, both the painful and the happy ones, are still in some way tied to this, even if you can't always see it. So the handbook, How to Be a Human Being handbook, has to be founded on the idea that learning will happen in an incongruous, totally organic way, and that we have to be open for people to get to their destination in a different time and method than I would, or than you would. So this understanding, this awareness, this acceptance, well, how would we frame that up? How would we make that part of the handbook? Now, we may run out of time here for this last little part, but I'm going to read like a couple of them off and talk a little bit about them, and we'll get as far as we can. One of the things in that handbook would say, you will feel hurt by others' actions and words. And this is as much for you to learn about as it is for them. The second one, you will find yourself being shocked and disappointed by the actions of others and by the events of life. And it is precisely at these moments you'll want to return to your work, to your investigation, to your research on wholeness, and to your practice of communication. The third one is you are allowed to choose, to say no or yes, to do this consciously or without realizing what you agreed to, and any outcome is still an acceptable step along the way. But remember, you did choose somewhere at some level. If you're there, if you're in it, if it's your life and you're present, you're participating in it, then you chose it. Another one is you are here to debunk your own theories and conclusions. Forming them and then seeing their limitations is the sign that you are growing. And although it feels safe and comfortable to land on conclusions and build your life around them, it's not what I think human beings are here for, and it just leads to rigidity. Another one, I'm still got enough time here, is suffering and loss are part of life for very good reasons, because it causes us to take seriously that we are here and to care about it and to figure out what we do care about. Another one is you are supposed to be at risk, learning how to see the risk, building a relationship with it that neither overpowers or disregards it is one of the great choices you will make in every single day, because risk and comfort are driving so much of what you like, what you want, what you will engage in, and how you engage in it. The next one is ownership and not turning away from the truth of who you are and what's happening for you at any moment is the source of true bravery. And this ownership, you're never going to deliver on it fully, because it's to be tried on and cried over and run from. And then find yourself drawn back to your own reflection, hopefully with more capacity to see it for what it is on the second or third, right, or the 60th time. The other one is don't shy away from dark thoughts and feelings, because the more you do, the scarier they will be. And there is no human experience that could be described as having it all, no matter what it looks like on the surface. For the person living inside of it, there will always be something missing. because the learning experience of life is actually based very much on this idea of closing gaps and seeing what's missing and adding to it. And it will take a whole lifetime of having what's missing for breakfast most days. Then this next one is, if you could absorb each of the lessons at the appropriate age with the right amount of experiential practice, you would still need to repeat these opportunities for learning over and over. Our psyches, our heads, have to accept that learning must be repetitive for us to get it. Our egos don't like it, so it really causes us, if we could get that piece, the repetitive part, and know that it's going to be, that we would surrender to our humanity, and that brings us to a more humble place, where we also then drop more closely to our spiritual journey and have a lot more freedom to choose who we will actually be in life. I have a few more of these to share with you, but I think we're kind of out of time, and I've downloaded kind of as much as there is for us to do today. I hope you will think about your handbook, what you would put in it, and some of the pieces I did at the end, which are what would I build in so that it would make it possible to understand life better. Have a wonderful week. Thank you for sharing the time with me.